All right, y'all, we got a little debate to go over here. So, it's Russell Brand and Jordan... I don't know how to speak. Russell Brand and Jordan Peterson have heated gender debate. That's the title of this video here on Russell Brand's channel. As far as I know, I am the last person who had a heated gender debate with Jordan Peterson. So, we'll take a look at this. And then I actually want to go back and review my debate with him as well. So let's check it out, and we'll break it down as we go.
The things that I wanted to start with, given Elon Musk's recent takeover of Twitter, is whether he is a distinct and discrete category of a billionaire. How is he different? How is he the same? And how will Elon Musk's position at Twitter alter your position on Twitter?
All right, so apparently we're starting with Elon Musk and not the trans debate, but I'm here for that too, so I'll break this down as well.
Well, that remains to be seen. I'm still banned, so that hasn't changed. I mean, he's suggested that he might reinstate Trump. Whether or not that means he'd reinstate me is a matter of question. It isn't obvious to me that the people who run the social media networks know exactly how to regulate them with any degree of utility. You know, I've probably read 100,000 comments.
By the way, I'm not sure the cuts, like you saw an edit there, I'm not sure that's because Russell edited it. I mean, he may, or his, an editor of his may have edited it. But I know when I interviewed Jordan, he records from like rural Canada, and so the internet connection was not really that good. So it may have been just like cleaning up the feed, if that makes sense. But having said that, it could be that Russell's team edited it.
It's online, or maybe more. And I tried to read them with a psychologist's eye. And there are some things going on online that are, I think, that actually pose a threat to the integrity of the culture itself. The biggest problem that I can see is that the large online platforms allow anonymous troll demons to rampage through...
Troll demons. Okay, that is a good term.
...society with no cost to themselves. And I can identify these people quite accurately now. This will make a number of the people who are watching and listening uncomfortable because they'll be in the list of people who do this sort of thing. So the first thing is they have an anonymous name. The second thing is the anonymous name usually has something psychologically significant about it in a very negative direction. So it's self-denigrating, or it's demonic, or it's otherwise offensive, and purposefully so. And then the people who are utter cowards, likely to be narcissists and Machiavellians, resentful people sitting in their basement at home, dwelling on their misery and doing everything they can to spew toxicity out into the world. Alone in their bedrooms, they're just isolated people who aren't causing any trouble. But as soon as they multiply themselves millions of times using this incredible, powerful computer technology, they're not even human anymore. In my estimation, they're literally a demonic force. And I mean that in a technical sense, right?
They're not even human, they're demonic. And I mean that in a technical sense. We have this study that just came in from MIT, which found that indeed it is a demonic force, which is on Twitter. By the way, I do find this criticism kind of ironic, right? Because one of the criticisms from the right when it comes to social media, and this, I mean, I think this is fair. I mean, I think they're wrong in saying that censorship only targets the right, but I think the criticism of like too much censorship and deplatforming, I think that's a fair criticism. I have issues with how a lot of these social media algorithms work, and with how many people get banned and what the standards are and the lack of transparency, like all that stuff, I think is a real problem. But fundamentally, it sounds like he's making the opposite argument here. If the original criticism is, hey, they cracked down on free speech too much because, Jordan was one of the people who was banned, right? You can't in the next breath say, well, the real problem is that there's this demonic force of anonymous trolls and we need to do something to stop that. Because, no, the anonymous trolls, that is they would be the quintessential example of the freest speech, right? Like, if you're going to say I'm pro-free speech on social media, that means also for the anonymous trolls. And, look, anybody who's any semblance of a public figure is familiar with anonymous trolls, and I say, do you? It's not a big deal. I don't even read the replies anymore because there's probably a lot of that trolling shit going on. And it's like, okay, but I'm not trying to ban those people from Twitter, or make them like a second-tier Twitter user or whatever the hell. Anyway, let's keep going.
You and I aren't exactly you and I in this conversation because we're amplified hundreds of times or thousands of times or hundreds of thousands of times. And so we're not just human, we're androids in some sense operating in a virtual space. And these online trolls have that power because they have access to an audience that they would never gather by their own merits. They are saying things that are derisive and inflammatory and that would absolutely 100% get them punched if they ever said it in public. Imagine that there's a hierarchy of unconstrained people, and there's a variety of people who are very unconstrained, but in normal social discourse would be able to keep themselves under control because of the controls that are there in normal social discourse. You lift those controls and they just go off. And so that's what we're seeing online. And that has to be stopped. I think the large tech companies should be required to put in know your customer laws. They should ban anonymous accounts, but in this way. Imagine that you have a section for comments where it's real human beings that are verified, and you have another section underneath that's for anonymous troll demons. And if you want to go visit their hell and see what their resentful minds are spewing into the public landscape, then you can. Otherwise, you stick to the real human beings. And
I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea to, like, mandate no anonymity, but you have to be honest about that and say that would sort of crack down on free speech, because it would, right? Like, I get the argument, and it makes sense. I do think there would be more civility, more conversation, more people treating each other like they're real people who are there face-to-face, although it won't really be like face-to-face, because when you're face-to-face, you're, like, next-to-level polite. But it will make social media less of a cesspool. I agree with that. But I do think that is fundamentally cracking down on free speech, or at least, like, heavily regulating free speech. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think that's a crazy idea, but I think you have to concede that it does sort of restrict freedom, because part of the internet that people find attractive is you can be anonymous, right? So anyway.
I don't know if Musk and the other people who are running the big social media networks understand the pathology that's associated with this online commentary well enough to control it. So we'll see.
I mean, I think everybody acknowledges that that like social media is pathological, although it's weird. Like, Instagram is randomly really nice. I don't know why, I don't know how, but you know, I don't have an Instagram, but Crystal does, and whenever she posts something, she shows me the comments. I'm like, geez, why are they so nice over there? On Twitter, everybody's ripping you a new asshole. You know, and Facebook is just grandpas posting insane memes. So, like, it is, like, pathological, and social media definitely has negative effects. But, yeah, what to do about that? I agree that it's an impossible question. It's a very, very difficult question.
What I would like to draw your attention to, still sort of within the broad rubric of looking at Musk's acquisition of Twitter and how that may play out and how it may affect you personally. I was myself struck with, like, you know, I think the tweet that you were banned for was sort of like commenting on Elliot Page. How do we prioritize compassion, kindness, love? And can't this basic palette of principles prevent us from getting into conflict around these ideas?
Well, it isn't obvious to me that love can be reduced to compassion at all. Because for a variety of reasons. First of all, I think love is a multidimensional virtue, and there's many other virtues than compassion. Think about it this way, Russell. Imagine that the purest expression of compassion is the love of a mother for a true infant. We could really think about that as true compassion, 100% compassion. And the reason for that is that if you have an infant from birth to, say, 6 months old, nothing the infant does is ever to be questioned. The proper response to the infant is, whatever the cause of their distress, you immediately prioritize its reduction. But then as the child starts to develop, and as soon as it becomes capable of its own voluntary movement, as soon as it becomes ambulatory, its nervous system starts to change, of course. But then there are other elements that have to be introduced into the relationship to make it a relationship of proper love. And some of that's judgment, which is often considered antithetical to compassion. And some of it's encouragement. And encouragement has a fair bit of judgment in it, because when you're encouraging someone, you're not exactly being compassionate for who they are. You're doing what you can to facilitate who they could be. And what you're doing constantly when you're encouraging someone is prioritizing who they could be over who they are. And that's an element of judgment. And that judgment, you might say, if you're not thinking about it precisely from the religious perspective, is your own ability to decide which parts of you should go. Then the question is, are you compassionate for who you are, or are you compassionate for who you could be? And the second is just as important, or maybe more important.
I mean, I don't think this is wrong, but obviously the question is, like, how do you balance those things as well as possible?
Important.
And when that's applied to the self, I can see that the requirement for this judgment, the great success you've had in, clean your room, stand up straight, these kind of edicts offered to young men or young people who require discipline, I can see the success of that. But Jordan, I feel that when it becomes an outward strike of like, this person should not have done this thing, this is the impact of these actions will have on the culture, this will lead to this kind of denigration, this will lead to decisions that are, in my view, palpably wrong. I feel that this is where we have to redress an imbalance around compassion. I feel that Elliot Page should be able to do whatever Elliot Page wants to do, and that my only role is to say, I recognise that I don't understand, and why would I understand? There are less obvious things that you could never understand about me. They're less evident and obvious, and for me, the basic principle of kindness and compassion is going to be my guide when dealing with Elliot Page and when posting something about Elliot Page. I do have recourse to the idea of, what do I want Elliot Page to feel? Happy, accepted. That's what I want Elliot Page to feel. And if there are aspects of that I don't understand, then I'm willing to take the hit.
So before Jordan responds here, it seems like Russell Brand's critique is more like the tone and the anger that Peterson had when going after Elliot Page. And of course he's referring to the famous tweet where Peterson said something along the lines of, a criminal physician did this surgery on her. Fuck, what was the exact... Hold on. Let me actually pull it up. Okay, here it is. I just wanted to make sure I got everything right about it. So he's responding to some tweet. I can't see what the tweet is here. It may have been like the picture of Elliot Page on the cover of a magazine or something like that. And Peterson says, "Remember when pride was a sin? And Ellen Page just had her breasts removed by a criminal physician." Okay, so this is the tweet that Russell Brand is taking issue with, but it seems to me, and you guys tell me if you disagree with this or not, it seems to me like his only issue with it was like in tone. Like, you're being angry and you're being judgmental. Like, isn't there a sort of a nicer way to get your point across? It seems to me like that's the criticism of Russell Brand. Anyway, let's continue.
When you think about your behavior on your YouTube channel, you're spending a lot of time in public criticism, and going after large corporations, going after those who are engaged in fascist collusion, and I think rightly so. I think that you're an extremely useful voice in that regard, and you're a critical voice, and you're a critical comedic voice, which is a good kind of critical voice, and not exactly compassionate, right? Because you're also using creativity on the humor side to make your point, and you're doing it in a playful way, and I think that playful criticism is the hallmark of the master critic. And I think the joker and the jester in that regard are master critics. But that's not compassion, right? That's a different virtue. And often it's very, very pointed. You do act as a social critic in many, many ways, and you do leaven it with comedy, and I think that's extraordinarily appropriate. It's part of what's given you such a broad voice. And that criticism is absolutely necessary. Now let's speak about Elliot Page more specifically. So the first thing I'd like to bring up is the fact that in the UK, the Tavistock Clinic was recently closed. And that was the biggest clinic doing gender transformation surgery that operated in the British world. 1,000 of the 19,000 kids have now launched a lawsuit for medical malpractice. And when Elliot Page went online and showed off his or her new chest, she or he got 1.7 million Instagram likes. So then the question is, okay, compassion. Well, I think Elliot Page stepped over the line from victim to perpetrator, because when girls hit puberty, their negative emotion spikes and they develop bodily image problems because neurotic and that would be negative emotional experience for women is extremely tightly tied to body image. And so if you're a girl who is undergoing the hormonal changes that are going to elevate your negative emotion, which is what happens at puberty, you're going to be focused on body image. And if you're an unpopular girl and you're awkward socially, the probability that you're going to think something's wrong with your body is almost 100% if you're female.
So I can see.
So what's the standard then? Is the standard that adults are allowed to transition? So in Jordan Peterson's world, it's okay for adults to be trans, but you can't be on the cover of a magazine. Or what? Can you be in the magazine but on the cover? Can you, is there no way in which you can just be a trans person in the public eye, because then you think you're sort of promoting it and therefore going to confuse young people about their gender? Like, I'm trying. What are the rules here? Like, what's the standard that we're setting? Because obviously Russell's position is, look, Elliot Page is Elliot Page. That's who he is. I accept that, I acknowledge that, and, like, that's kind of the end of the conversation, right? But Jordan Peterson's position seems to be, you can't, if you're trans, that's okay, maybe, right? Not 100% sure he believes that, but let's just give him the benefit of the doubt and say he believes that. But, like, you can't be so publicly visible, you can't be a celebrity, you can't be a role model, because then you're confusing young people. That seems a little absurd, because think back to, I'm sure the first time that homosexuality became prominent, there were similar criticisms, that if there was a gay person who was like, you know, whatever, a public singer, a public figure, I should say, or some sort of musician or actor or whatever, that, like, yeah, if there was a little bit of flamboyant nature, let's say, to that person, I'm sure there were criticisms that were like, hey, like, why are you pushing this stuff on my kids, man? And it's like, are they really doing that? Or are they just being themselves in public? And are you interpreting that as, like, what? Elliot Page being somebody who's evangelical or fundamentalist around trans issues? So, like, not only do I want you to recognize me as trans, which is okay, but I'm actively trying to convert people to transness? Is that what he thinks is happening? It does feel very similar to, like, old school arguments that are used against the gay community. And, you know, it was like, we slowly but surely gained ground on that front. So, you know, maybe the position evolved from, you can't be gay. Being gay is wrong. It's a sin. It's unnatural, whatever. People used to say that. And then it became like, okay, if you're gay, fine, but, like, just totally keep it in the closet. You know, and then, like, okay, if you're gay, it's fine, but just don't be so flamboyant about it. Okay, if you're gay and you're flamboyant, it's fine, but, you know, don't teach kids this. You know, okay, if you're gay and flamboyant, it's fine, and now we're at the point where it's like, okay, well, except in Florida, where they have that new bill that just passed, but it's like, if you're gay, it's fine, and if you're a teacher, it's not like you're grooming the kids into being gay, you're just gay and existing, right? So, like, there was slow growth on that issue and evolution on that issue, where now, generally speaking, society accepts gay people. Gay marriage support is what, 70%, 80%, something like that. And admitted, there's still, you know, a backlash. Like, there was a vote in the House recently, and 157 Republican politicians voted against gay marriage. So there's still bigotry, but now that is the more unpopular position, right? But it seems on trans issues, we're still way back in time. Like, we're still at the beginning of the fight. And so somebody can make an argument like Peterson is making, and I was going to say it doesn't strike most people as extreme, but I don't know. I think it kind of did. Like, there were plenty of Peterson fans who heard the stuff he said in his debate with me, where they were like, oh, no, man, that seems extreme. All right, so let's see what Brand responds with.
What makes you angry about it? It's your analysis and it's your opinion that it's a powerful influencer and it's going to lead people to make decisions that are going to be detrimental to their lives. But the evident and palpable anger, I feel, diminishes your position, because now anger is in the conversation. I think you offer a great deal that is...
Okay, but again, I don't even agree with Russell Brand here, because he's making it's a tone argument. It's like, why are you so angry and vitriolic when you talk about that issue? And my disagreement is not in tone. He could have whatever tone he wants. My disagreement is more of a substantive disagreement. That fundamentally, Elliot Page did nothing wrong, right? Like, that's my point. Are we convinced that there's going to be, you know, what, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions who are going to see Elliot Page on the cover of a magazine and say, now I'm confused about my gender, and I will actively get a surgery and transition, and then, you know, I'll regret it later on because I was duped by a picture of Elliot Page in a magazine? That all seems so far-fetched to me. Super far-fetched. You know, do I want to make sure that if somebody is trans, that they speak to experts in the field and doctors and their family, and basically make sure they have gender dysphoria before any action is taken? Of course I want that. But do I think Elliot Page is promoting people to do this simply by being on a magazine cover or in a magazine? No, I don't. I don't think that. I think it's just a trans person existing in the same way that maybe the first time... Who was the first, like, publicly gay celebrity that was on a magazine cover? Who was it? Was it maybe Ellen DeGeneres? No, it had to be before that, right? I don't know. But, like, I think if anything, what's likely to happen is people just start accepting... Over time, they'll start accepting more in Ellen DeGeneres' case, gayness. In Elliot Page's case, transness. And it might actually have the effect of people who are trans they feel not alone and not like they're so different and so abnormal and so freakish, right? Like they feel like, no, this is okay, this exists, and now there's a public figure that lets me know it exists. So it might make them feel better in a sense. Validated if they're actually trans, right? Is there some small percentage of people that might, like, you know, effectively get it wrong and fall for a fad or something like that? It's possible, right? Because he talks about this idea of, like, a social contagion. It'll spread, and it'll spread, like, falsely, effectively. I don't want to say that never happens, but, I mean, there are numbers, right, on the number of people who actually detransition after surgery, and isn't it, like, 2% or 1% or even less than that? Which tells me that the overwhelming majority of people, they're not just, like, willy-nilly going to chop off their dick and balls. If somebody gets to the point where they're doing a surgery, the overwhelming majority of the time, they are super convinced they're doing the right thing, and they're trying to identify with how they feel. So, anyway, all right, let's listen to the rest of it.
Valuable and necessary, but I feel beyond the value and necessity of honesty, authenticity, and information that is underwritten by data and experience, I feel that it creates more opposition to approach a matter like this in the manner that you have done. What are we going to anchor ourselves to ultimately, Jordan, navigating this space? Are we going to be participants in creating more and more ossified and oppositional camps, or are we going to create cartilage between us so that we can move between a room that Jordan Peterson is in and a room that Elliot Page is in and say, look, I believe in love, and I know it's complicated. I think you're beautiful and full of love. I really believe in that. And then when I sort of hear people being dismissive of you, it upsets me. It upsets me. And I see how you arm them. I feel that you arm them by sort of, in their language, dead naming Elliot Page. And I feel like why would you do that? It isn't necessary. It isn't necessary. Of course, it's the statistics you've cited about the Tavistock Clinic.
Okay. Look, I think the reason he does that is, and, you know, when I asked him, should adults be allowed to transition? He said, I don't know. That's what he said, and I'm going to show you the video in a little bit, but that's what he said. So, the reason why he does that, Russell, is because at best, he's not sure transness should even exist. He's not sure, like, the surgeries, the hormone treatment, the puberty blockers, whatever. He's not sure any of that stuff should exist. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, it's because he actually definitely doesn't think it should exist. You understand what I'm saying? So he's like, well, why would you use that tone? Why would you say that thing? Why would you dead name him? And that's the answer. The answer is because he doesn't know if this thing should exist or thinks it shouldn't exist. And he's convinced that this is going to lead to a social contagion where kids wrongly, change their gender, and it's going to hurt them, so I'm trying to stop them from hurting themselves. That's his mindset. Now, look, this conversation would be a lot easier to have, though, if everybody was just more upfront with what they actually believe. So it's like, I feel like we're having a conversation around the conversation here. Does that make sense? Like, I want Russell Brand needs to state exactly what his position is on trans issues. My guess is his position is, if you want to do it, go ahead. It's fine. I love you. It's cool. Like, you're just recognizing who you are more clearly. More power to you, right? Like, I think that's what Russell Brand's position is. And Jordan Peterson's position is, I'm not sure this thing should even really exist. Maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't. I don't know, as he told me when I asked if adults should transition, right? Or Jordan comes out and says, I don't think it should exist. And that, I think, is at the heart of the disagreement here, right? So, the conversation around the conversation is a little tough. Because it's like, I just want them both to be more upfront. You know what I'm saying? So, anyway, let me run that back just a touch.
sort of, in their language, dead naming Elliot Page. And I feel like why would you do that? It isn't necessary. It isn't necessary. Of course, it's the statistics you've cited about the Tavistock Clinic appear to speak for themselves. Is there a way that we can handle this that would be more akin to how we might imagine Christ would handle it? Otherwise, what's the point of Christianity? What's the point of Christianity if we're not going to embody Christ in our behavior?
So he's trying to use Jordan's own, ideological leanings against him here to be like, look, if you say you're Christian, if you say you're compassionate, then show more compassion when dealing with this topic and when dealing with Elliot Page. And also, look, kind of a devastating point here. It was 5 minutes ago, 6 minutes ago, where Jordan Peterson was saying, all of that demonic energy from the anonymous trolls online is, demonic. And I mean that in a technical sense. So it's evil because of the spirit and the anger and the vitriol that they're putting out there. But he then turns around and he uses a similar amount of anger and vitriol when dealing with Elliot Page and the trans issue in general. And also, remember when he went after that model? What was the model's name? I don't remember. There was some, slightly overweight model that he was sorry, not beautiful. It's well, hold on. Do you not like the anger and the vitriol, or do you like it? Or do you only like it when you get to deploy it on the issues you care about? And it seems like that's where he is, and he maybe doesn't realize his hypocrisy on that or whatever.
Look, everybody who's operating in the online space that we're operating is trying to get the tone right? And you do that in part by paying attention to the audience, and you do that by trying to see how people are responding, and not in a way that's pandering, but...
That's funny he says that, 'cause I actually have a different approach. Your tone is whatever your tone is. I view it almost as I don't know whether my tone was developed because of nature or nurture, right? But it is what it is. I'm not trying to, mold it to the dictates of an audience which is fluid. You know what I'm saying? So it's funny that he's seemingly trying to say, I'm gauging it based on the audience, which is interesting because his new audience is definitely different than his old audience because now he's with the Daily Wire and he has a more and more conservative following, whereas back in the day when he was just psychology Jordan Peterson, it was more a broad array of people. It was probably liberals, some leftists, centrists, and conservatives.
In a way that's open and attentive. And it's a very difficult thing to get right. So the question you're asking is, well, when is anger appropriate? When is it not appropriate? When is it only inflammatory? That's a really hard question to answer, to get that.
Yeah, again, and this is why I don't agree with the thrust of Russell's argument being about his tone. I don't agree with that because, no, if you're monotone and sort of laid back, fine. If you're in the middle, fine. If you're aggressive, fine. The tone is not the issue. We should get to the meat of the conversation, which is the substance and the actual positions.
That balance between judgment and encouraging acceptance, right? I suppose part of the problem is we don't know exactly how emotions scale in an online environment, right? And definitely I found that even when I'm delivering very cutting material, as I just wrote an article for The Telegraph on the upcoming privation that Europe is going to be facing and the rest of the world in the winter. And I tried to read it as calmly as I possibly could, even though it's extremely cutting. And the calm delivery seems to alienate fewer people and bring people in more than an angry delivery without any shift in semantic content.
I mean, that could be true, and maybe it is true in that instance, but there's also times when, there's a lot of people who've made it in the online space where they say something really fucking bombastic and over the top and deliver it aggressively, and then, after that, they sort of roll it back and add the nuance. And, that oftentimes gets more eyeballs than just the person who's calm and nuanced up front. You know what I'm saying? So he seems to be saying that the calmness is good here, but in some circumstances it is. Maybe in other circumstances it's really not, at least if you're talking about to get the most views on it to impact the most people.
The right principle is probably something like minimal necessary force in your personal interactions and minimal necessary emotion in your online behavior.
Yeah, but I mean, I would argue for just be whoever you are. If you're naturally sort of loud and aggressive, fine. If you're naturally sort of laid back and calm, that's fine too. Again, to me, it just all goes back to the substance. Whatever the substantive position is what matters the most. And obviously on this issue, substantively, I disagree with Jordan massively. And Russell, I don't know, may or may not disagree with Jordan substantively, but just is taking issue with his tone first and foremost, I guess.
But it's hard to know exactly what that means. And it's not as if I think I've done it perfectly. I mean, you move like this towards that central line that
he loves doing that thing with his hand.
Hopefully is moving uphill.
All right. So now let's go back. We haven't watched this. We haven't watched this together yet. So let's do it now. Me and Jordan Peterson going back and forth on this exact issue.
So I noticed just the other day you were banned from Twitter.
By the way, little known fact, I actually had COVID during this interview, and it was like in the middle of it when my symptoms were probably the worst. Having said that, it wasn't that bad. It was very mild for me, but it's kind of funny that I had COVID when this was happening. I was very, very stuffed and sore throat and everything.
Now, I'm somebody, nobody can argue against my lefty credentials. Everybody knows I'm a man of the left. Having said that, my solution on this issue of social media censorship has always been, look, we need to expand First Amendment protections. And the way you do that is to regulate these big social media companies like they're public utilities. So if you do that, then basically you're saying this is the new public square and people can speak their mind here. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, you can't, dox people or do direct threats of violence or anything that's actually illegal will remain illegal. But outside of that, you can't censor people just based on political opinion.
Super based. This guy's based.
So, I definitely wouldn't have banned you, suspended you, etc. But I do have a question about that specific tweet that did get you in trouble because, you said something to the effect of...
well, I don't know if it got me in trouble. I don't think I'm in trouble. Twitter banned me, but I don't consider that trouble.
That's fair enough. Fair point. But you said something to the effect of, remember when pride was a sin and the criminal physician...
And Ellen Page just had her breasts cut off by a criminal physician.
Exactly. So my question is the physician really criminal? If you agree that adults can decide to transition, then why would the physician be criminal? Don't adults have that right if they want to transition?
Not everything.
That's such a long pause. By the way, I have this on 1.25 times speed, and that was an uncomfortably long pause. I remember in person, you can't see my face here, but after the pause goes on, like, an uncomfortable amount of time, I make a face that where, like, my eyes widen, and I'm, like, waiting for the answer. But you can't see that here. It's a shame.
Can decide to transition, then why would the physician be criminal? Don't adults have that right if they want to transition?
Not everything legal isn't criminal. And do they...
Not everything that's illegal isn't criminal. Yeah, so, I mean, like, look, if he wants the surgery to be criminalized, then he should say that clearly, right? Like, ban transition surgery for adults. He should say that clearly.
They have that right? See, I would have left Ellen Page alone if she hadn't been parading her new abs in a fashion magazine. How many kids do you think she can convince to convert? 1?
Yeah.
1,000? No, not, yeah.
No,
really.
I want to respond to that. I think that with the trans community, it's very similar to the gay community, where back when that first...
So I make the same argument here that you guys just heard me make in the context of responding to the Russell Brand debate. I guess I'll just keep it going anyway.
Became a big issue. People thought, oh, if we talk about it, if it's in magazines or whatever, we're promoting kids to go down that path. But really what happened is people are who they are. And if they're gay, they just decided to be like, yeah, I'm gay. And they were just more open and honest with themselves. So I don't think you're promoting people to do that.
No,
you're
that's
just
not
saying,
what happened.
if you are that, it's okay.
You're completely wrong. Okay, please explain.
Okay,
You're utterly
I'm
wrong.
listening.
There's
I'm
nothing
listening.
about that that's right.
He got really angry there. I don't... Like, he has to know that that perspective I just laid out exists, and it's a common one, right? So I don't know why he gets so... It's very, like... It's very condescending. I remember feeling like a little, like, whoa. Like, dude, this is a very common position. If you have an issue with it, like, please, like, go ahead and dissect it. You don't have to... utterly wrong!
So explain.
Well, there's been an absolute... Look, one of the reasons that I opposed Bill C-16 in Canada to begin with, this pronoun-compelled speech bill, was because I knew perfectly well what was going to happen when we introduced confusion about gender identity into the public sphere. Now, the argument was that if we left people with gender dysphoria alone to make their own way and stop torturing them, that we would decrease the mental health load on those individuals.
Yeah, like, it's good for those people to be fully who they are. And if they are is truly trans because they have gender dysphoria, then it's good to allow them to be themselves in the same way it's good to allow gay people to be themselves, right? Yeah, I mean, I think that's very logical.
And my analysis as a clinician was that for every one person of that sort that we hypothetically saved, we doom 1,000 more.
Yeah, but again, we have some numbers on detransitioners, and it's only like 2% or 1% or fewer, right? So that's not the case. That's not accurate based on the data. Now, if it changes, fine. Then, we could talk about that. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And maybe if it does change and there are a number of people who transition who weren't actually trans, they didn't have gender dysphoria, and they regret it, then maybe it's time to address the regulation to make it better so that you only have people transitioning who actually want to transition and won't regret it, right?
Consequence of confusion and social contagion. I knew the literature on psychogenic epidemics. They used to call that mass hysteria, and it's a literature that goes back about 300 years. And when you introduce social confusion.
300 years? The literature on this goes back 300 years?
You can produce a psychogenic epidemic, especially generally it's adolescent females who are most susceptible to it. So I thought, oh, well, what's going to happen is we'll produce a psychogenic epidemic of gender dysphoria among adolescent females. And that is exactly what's happened.
This is not a willy-nilly thing, right? Like, I'm not saying what he's scared is going to happen isn't happening to some small number of people, right? But when somebody actually transitions, and even if it's not like full transitioning, like bottom surgery type stuff, even if it's just like hormones or puberty blockers or whatever, there's individuals, experts, doctors, a family that are sort of all in consultation, determining it's really the right path, right? But he makes it seem like, a couple people see Elliot Page on the cover of a magazine and they're like, God, I really want to chop off my titties now. It's like, to the extent that it is a fad, right? I could see a scenario where, it's an in thing, it's popular, whatever, and then, like, people experiment, they call themselves, like, bro, I'm bisexual, or, like, I'm pansexual, or whatever, like, a little girl starts dressing like a tomboy, right? Or a boy starts dressing more like a girl, like Harry Styles or whatever the fuck. But, like, if it actually is a fad, I don't think the people who are going for the fad are gonna, like, do fucking bottom surgery willy-nilly on a random Wednesday after a day and a half of thought, right? And it seems like, I don't want to straw man him, it seems like that's the implication of the point he's making, right?
And it isn't the fact that we've freed up people who are, in doubt about their identity to be who they are.
I honestly think that's exactly what's happening. I really do. Like, so, I don't know, the numbers vary, right? When you say, like, what percentage of the population is gay? I don't know the exact number. Let's say, for argument's sake, it's 5% or 10%, right? Well, you could, if you chart this all along for like the past 100 years in American history, there would be a time when, like, 0.01% or 0.1% of the population was openly honest about being homosexual? And then now, oh my God, it skyrocketed to 10%. Look at the social contagion. It's spread all over the place, bro. And because we allowed homosexuality to be socially accepted, now people are choosing to be homosexual, and it's going up, right? And it's like, well, no, the argument is it was always about 5 or 10% of the population. Just back in the day, people had to fucking hide it and be miserable. And now we're just allowing people to be more open and honest. And the same process, I think, is probably happening with trans people. Look, it's not that hard for me to conceptualize that there are some people who are born biologically male and internally they're female, right? Like, they have the brain of a female, right? And vice versa. Biologically male, but they feel female. Or biologically female, but they feel male. And that's like a real thing that has existed for as long as we can remember. So I don't think it's like fake or made up or just environmental, or I don't buy that. I don't buy that. Now, look, you want to have a conversation where we talk about the more extreme trends. People, I identify as a fucking vampire, or I identify as a mongoose. Okay, then I'm with you, and that's made up and that's dumb, right? But this is not that. This is something totally different.
That may have happened in a tiny minority of cases. It's absolutely and definitely the case that we've doomed thousands of kids to brutal, mutilating surgery and premature sterility, and we've done that.
They don't do bottom surgery on kids. They don't do it. I mean, maybe you could find a handful of cases, and I would be totally fine with banning that. But as far as I know, and this is something I've looked for, there's no bottom surgery on kids. The thing that does happen with some kids when they're in the range of like 13, 14, 15, 16 is if they're in consultation with an expert, a doctor, and the doctor is convinced and assured this person has gender dysphoria, in some instances, they may get top surgery or hormones or puberty blockers. And look, do I think there's a reasonable debate and conversation to be had on that topic? Absolutely. In fact, they have that within the trans community and among the experts. In fact, they've publicly, like I've read articles where experts have different positions on when is the right time where it's okay to allow hormones or puberty blockers or do a top surgery. Like, when is that time actually okay? There's a reasonable discussion to be had. But effectively the fear-mongering that there's some 4-year-old getting bottom surgery, that's not a thing. So I would like it if we could have the more like nuanced, intelligent conversation and not the one where, we're afraid that in 10 years we're going to wake up and like 50% of the population is going to be trans.
On the altar of our hypothetical moral virtue and compassion. Look, I read a corporate analysis of the trans surgery industry last week. Growth rate projection for you lefty types and your anti-corporatism.
Again, I don't know why he's so mad at me here. I engage in, and you can go back, you can listen to the interview. I engaged in good faith the entire time. I try to be nuanced. I try to be thoughtful. I try to be direct in my responses to him. So with his, the vitriol, just so much vitriol.
Growth rate projection, 15% per year. Invest now. A $350 million business as of 2022, projected to expand to $750 million by 2027. No moral hazard there? There's plenty of moral hazard there.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think all healthcare should be free. So there should be no profit motive in any of that. So if you want me to concede that point, I'd happily concede that point. But again, to go back to the main argument here, the point is trans people have always existed. They've just been suppressed and underground and afraid, and they weren't accepted. So they had to live lives of misery. Now we're getting to the point where it's more socially acceptable. So whoever actually is trans is sort of coming out of the closet as trans. And so if there are, when they are adults, getting more surgery, including bottom surgery, top surgery, whatever drugs they need, right? Then that's okay. In fact, that's a good thing. It's self-actualization. And by the way, again, this is one of those arguments where if you are a big believer in freedom and liberty, and you are anti-authoritarian, and you are pro-individualist, this is a position you should take. Because these are adults making their own minds up with their own bodies and trying to do self-actualization and become who they truly are. I don't see anything wrong with that.
That surgery is absolutely brutal.
So what percentage of the population do you think, in your conception of how this is unfolding, what percentage of the population do you think is going to end up being trans at the end of this? Do you think like one day it's going to be like 70% of the country is trans?
Well, we know already that about 1 in 5 adolescents now identifies, to use that hated word, identifies as part of the hypothetical LGBTQ plus community. So it's what?
Yeah, but that includes lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and stuff like asexual, like all these things. And what do you say, 1 in 5? I mean, maybe that's a touch high, but it doesn't strike me as too crazy. It was probably 1 in 5 back in 1932, but they were all scared to admit it.
1 in 5. I don't know what the upper limit is. There's a consulting group in the UK now that's claiming there's 150 different genders. There's actually, I suppose, 7 billion different genders if you want to get technical about it, because everybody's temperament differs. But I don't know what the upper limit is, and I have no idea what the upper limit is for this surgical intervention. We'll see. But I don't find it. I don't find it the least bit acceptable. And if you think that your compassion is demanding that you extend your pity to the LGBTQ plus community at the cost of sterilizing children, you should think again. You're on the wrong side of this, and not in a trivial way.
Okay, now, by the way, that was him totally strawmanning me, because I'm not in favor of sterilizing children. I'm not in favor of bottom surgery on children, and the experts are also not in favor of those things, and that doesn't really happen. Okay? So, again, that was a straw man of my position, and I point that out here.
I would appreciate if you don't ascribe beliefs to me that I don't have. Remember, my original question was
you said earlier in this question that
I said Elliot Page is an adult, and so do you think that he has the right to transition? That was the original question.
You made some comments after that. Yeah, but as a star and a public figure and a model for emulation, she also has the responsibility not to entice confused adolescents into a catastrophic decision.
Yeah, so Ellen DeGeneres in 1993 or whenever the fuck it was, she has a right to be gay, but just don't get on that magazine cover. You don't want to entice children into this lifestyle. This is what that sounds like.
Before they have the maturity to make that decision.
I just have to say, Jordan, I think it's a little bit of a moral panic. I just don't see some sort of, frenzy of people wanting to become trans.
First of all, that's a hell of a way to put it.
What?
Why don't you take...
It's an honest way to put it. Again, in this, and you, again, go back and watch it. I'm clear, I'm concise, I'm operating in good faith the entire time, I'm telling my true feelings. That it may sound like a bombastic claim in the context of this conversation, but it's my true feelings, and he gets very angry.
Take a look at the increase in surgical interventions and see what you think. I mean, how many do you think is too many?
Again,
if we're talking about
I'll answer your question. The argument is it used to be very repressed because that's very outside of the tradition and the norm and the standard, and that now we sort of let the boot off the neck a little bit.
What used to be suppressed?
The entire LGBTQ community. I mean, it was very recently we even got gay marriage in the United States.
First of all, they're not a community.
Well, you understand.
That's such a sidestep.
Is this community? No, actually, neither I understand it nor you, and that's why we're...
Yeah. I mean, look, I sincerely believe if Jordan Peterson and I had this conversation in 2018 or 2019, when did he start with the whole benzo withdrawal and that whole fiasco, and he was sick? Before he went through that, right? So I want to say, I guess 2018. If him and I had this conversation, I think he would have engaged in much more calmly, and he wouldn't have been as angry and vitriolic and demeaning to me. You know what I'm saying? He literally says here, I don't understand what you're saying, and you don't either. It's like, you do understand the points I said. Everybody listening understood the point I made. You can respond to it directly and try to convince me otherwise, or you can fucking demean me, and he demeaned me, basically.
Community. No, actually, neither I understand it nor you, and that's why we're delving into it. First of all, they're not a community. That's just a catchphrase. It's a buzzword.
No, see, I'm not taking a position in any way, shape, or form on the kids because I don't know the first thing about this to comment on the kids. Well, but see, that's why we're having this conversation, though, is because my original question was about the adults and what your take is on the adults. And it sounds to me like, let me ask you a question, would you ban transition surgery for adults?
I don't know.
I mean, that's the drop the mic moment, right? I mean, he should say this up front in every conversation he has on the issue, because people should know that's the core of the argument. That's the meat of the discussion. That's really what we've been dancing around the whole time, and that's the core of my disagreement and the core of most people's disagreement with him.
Really?
Yeah, really. We're paying a big price for it, and I think that it was an act of stunning hubris to conduct the first trans surgery procedure. And it's not obvious to me at all that it's been a net social good.
But aren't there some people that are obviously trans, who were born in one body, they feel like they're in the other body, and when they're an adult, they can make the decision? And then even from just a freedom and liberty perspective, shouldn't they have that right? Even if they do it and then they regret it, shouldn't they have the right to try it?
It's a good question. I mean, it's a tricky one, right? Because there's all sorts of surgical...
But I don't think that one's tricky. I actually think that one's really easy. I think for adults, that's the easy question. You're convinced you have gender dysphoria, you talk to an expert, they verify you have gender dysphoria, you make the decision as a grown adult. That's the easy one. That's the layup. The difficult one is where you get to before they're an adult, when it's 14, 15, 16. That's the difficult area, right? That's the one where it's like, ooh, this is a little difficult here. This is tough. But when they're adults,
enhancement procedures that are it's not obviously appropriate to make them illegal. And I don't know exactly where the cutoff line is, so to speak, and that's partly why we're having a public discussion about it. But this entire argument, in many ways, is stated so idiotically that it almost defies description. I mean, what do you mean, feel like you're in the wrong body?
You know what that means, man. Everybody knows what that means. You know what that means.
What kind of measurement is that? No, hang on a sec.
There
are rules for these sorts of diagnostic decisions.
Yeah, he asked me the question, then I answered, he's like, hold on. So, then why'd you ask me a question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The rule is that you have to make a valid and reliable diagnosis. That's if you're diagnosing depression or anxiety or obsessive-compulsive disorder or cancer or anything like that. There are standards that you have to abide by in order to make a diagnosis, in order to fulfill the obligations of your professional college. If someone comes to you and says, I feel like I have lung cancer, that is not sufficient grounds upon which to formulate a diagnosis, much less proceed to surgery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but when it's depression and anxiety, it is. When it's depression and anxiety, if somebody insists they have depression, then they're usually given some sort of treatment, either talk therapy, or they're given SSRIs, or they're given, if it's anxiety, some benzo. Like, when it comes to certain things, it indeed is part of the equation, if not the majority of the picture, to make a diagnosis based on described symptoms. Yeah, when it comes to, like, more physical illness, as opposed to psychological issues, yeah, more physical illness, you're going to rely on, we're going to run blood tests, we're going to do an MRI, or whatever the fuck. But, like, depression and anxiety and a number of things, of course you go by what the person is telling you, right? That's a huge part of it. I don't... All right, we don't have to keep watching this. You guys get the point. Anyway, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that my debate with Jordan Peterson was more heated than Russell Brand's debate. Not taking a shot at Russell or anything, just saying. The crux of his disagreement seemed to be more on the tone. Maybe there's the subtext that he disagrees on the substance, but it seemed to be more on the tone. But anyway, there you have it. Hope you guys enjoyed it.